What's up guys, this is Casey and I'm bringing you a Blender tutorial today. This is going to be continuing with our series of Cycles Materials. So if you haven't already, make sure that you are switched up here to Cycles Render. And I think everything else should be good. So we're going to keep the default cube, but what we're going to be doing today is working on a procedural texture for tiles. It's going to be, I guess, sort of like could be a kitchen, maybe a bathroom tile, or maybe a pool tile, or something along those lines. You'll kind of get the idea of what I'm talking about when we get finished. However, I'm not going to focus on the modeling because it's kind of irrelevant for what I'm trying to show you. So we're just going to keep our default cube, we'll keep our default lamp. However, we will change our lamp to a sun lamp real quick. So if you right click on it and go to our little tab over here, we're going to click on sun. And I'm going to click Use Nodes, and I'm going to set the strength to 5. We might have to adjust that a little bit more later, but we'll see. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to right click on our cube, go to our Materials tab, and we're going to select Use Nodes, or if you have nothing here, which a lot of you probably don't, we're going to select New, and then it'll bring up a brand new material. If you want to rename it, you can. I'm not going to worry about it. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive right in. We're going to go right up here to where it says default layout, and we're going to change to our compositing layout so we can get right into our nodes. Actually, you know what? I'm going to make mine bigger for you guys just so it's easier to see. Let me go to my node editor. There we go. Okay, so this is our node editor. I'm hoping, since this is a tutorial about procedural textures, this is something that's not exactly for beginners. So if you don't know anything about the node editor, this isn't the best tutorial for you. If you know a little bit about it and you want to learn a little bit more, then stick around. We'll see what we can show you. Alright, so the very first thing I want to do is this diffuse node. I'm just going to go ahead and hit X and delete it. Boop. Away it goes. So all I'm left with here is my material output. The next thing I want to do is I want to start by adding a texture node, and I'm going to go with a brick texture. Now if you really want to, you can always go in here and add that diffuse node back in and connect the color to the color and that to the output, and we can go to our preview node, and if you go to your cube, you kind of get the idea of what you're looking at, what kind of settings you have for it. It just looks like bricks right now, but we're going to kind of work on changing that. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of my diffuse node again. Okay, so basically the offset, frequency, squash, frequency, this is all about sizing of your object. Actually, let me bring in that diffuse shader one more time because it'll probably be easier to show it to you. Go ahead and connect those up. Okay, so if I move this offset around, now you can see how these bricks do not line up anymore. Now they're just a little bit off from each other. That's basically what the offset is. So for this one, I want to go with just a value of 1. That way they're all lined up entirely. If you want to change this later, you can always get back in here and change it if you want offset tiles. However, I find for bathrooms and kitchens and pools, they're usually lined up. Okay, so next for the frequency, if I hit the frequency button to 3, 4, 5, basically you can just see that colors are changing. That's pretty much all this is. I'm going to go ahead and change that to 1. For squash value, if we move the squash value a little bit, you can see that a couple of these lines are completely gone. In this particular instance, we don't want that, so I'm going to go with another 1 value. And another one for the frequency, so let's turn that way up and see what we get here. And again, that is just for the colors of the tiles. So I'm going to go ahead and change that back down to 1. Okay, so I do not want to touch the vector node right here for now. However, color 1 and color 2 should both be white. So I'm just going to drag that up to white. I will leave color 1 to just this teeny tiny slightly off white. It's not a huge deal, it just adds a little bit of depth if they're not quite the same color. However, mortar I'm going to leave black as well. Okay, I don't want to mess with scale. We'll get to that later. We're going to go with our mortar size. So let's go ahead and show you what mortar size does. Okay, if you look over here in our preview bar, you'll see that all of the black lines have gotten absolutely outrageously big. If we go the opposite direction, they will completely disappear. That's those black lines that separate all of the tiles. So for our mortar size, I think 0.1 is probably the best way to go. Now, it's going to look really big, but we're going to get to that. We're going to make it look better, trust me. We're going to keep the bias at 0. The brick width is pretty much the same as the mortar width, or the mortar size, except it's just the width, and then below it you'll see row height. They're the same thing, so let's just change that to 1, and then we'll change our row height to 1 as well. And now you can see that our tiles are quite a bit bigger, now offset slightly by our mortar. And we have our basic brick texture. Okay, so now things are going to get a little bit more confusing. So let me go ahead and delete that diffuse, because that's not going to help us out anymore. So now that I have this brick texture, I want to add in another node. This is going to be color invert. And we're going to plug our factor of our brick texture into the color of the invert. What we're doing with this brick texture really is we're creating a bump map, which you'll see exactly what this is going to do later. We're going to add another brick texture for our actual bricks and a Musgrave texture for our glossiness and for our mortar. Okay, so now that we have our invert, let's go ahead and add our bump node. So vector bump, and we're going to plug our color directly into the height. And we're going to leave the strength for now, because that's going to come into play a little bit later as well. Okay, I think we're safe now. Let's go ahead and create a group out of this, because it'll be easier to work with. So I'm going to hold shift, and I'm going to select all 3 of these boxes. Do not select the material output box. Select all of these. Actually, make sure that if you hit A and deselect everything, select the left brick texture first, then select invert, then select bump. Now, let's go brick texture, bump, and then invert. So that makes invert the active node right now. You can see it's a slightly brighter color of orange than these ones are. Hopefully, when I go to node, make group, yeah, okay, so what happened here is since invert is not, well, there's only one input, and that's the factor input. However, we already have that set to 1. So our group has not tried to assign anything to this. If you make brick texture your active box here, you'll see that your group input has a bunch of lines going into all of your empty boxes for your brick texture. We don't want that. So if you've done that, just delete it, do your brick texture one more time, rewind the video, make sure the invert is selected, and then go to group input. Okay, so now that we have this, let's go ahead and I'm going to zoom out, pull my group input way out here for now. And we need another brick texture, and I'm just going to control D, or shift D I mean, to duplicate that brick texture, because pretty much all of our values are going to be the same. It's 1, 1, 1, 1. We're not going to mess with the vector, we're not going to mess with the colors, we're not going to mess with the, actually the mortar we do want to mess with. We want to make that a light gray color, somewhere right about in there. Our scale we're not going to mess with. The mortar size should be 0.1. Our bias we are going to change. That's going to be a 0.4. And then our brick width and height should be 1. Okay, so now that we have that brick texture set up, now we need to add a diffuse and a glossy shader. So let's go ahead and go shader, glossy, add shader, diffuse, like that. Okay, so we're not going to mess with the roughness value of the diffuse shader. However, we will mess with the roughness value of our glossy shader to make it a little bit more glossy. So that's 0.035 works pretty well. Obviously, if you're trying to make this on your own, it takes a lot of fiddling around with these settings to find out which ones are best. So I've done a lot of that fiddling for you in this one. However, this is hopefully to help you understand these nodes just a little bit better and understand how to make procedural textures so you can do it on your own sometime. It's a very long, annoying process sometimes, but it's well worth it if you can get good results. Don't be afraid to play around with it. Plug it into that diffuse shader, see what it looks like, all that good stuff. Okay, I'm going to pull my glossy and my diffuse just a little bit closer here. And the color value for the brick texture goes color, diffuse, like that. And the bump goes into the normal of both of these. Also, I found that using GGX for the glossy shader, sometimes Beckman works better. Really, it's just the type of math that is used to calculate the reflections for the glossy shader. They all work pretty well, but sometimes one just makes a slight improvement over the other, and I found that Beckman works pretty well for this one, so I'm going to go with that one. Okay, let's see. Let's do the Musgrave texture next. So I'm going to come all the way back up here, pretty much above my first brick texture, and I'm going to add a texture, Musgrave. Boom. Okay, so this is another one that if you wanted to, you could plug the diffuse shader in and get your preview over here. I'm not going to bother with that because I already have all of the settings for it. The vector we're not going to mess with, scale we won't mess with, detail is 2, dimension is 2, linearity is 1, offset is 0, and gain is 1. So it came out perfect already. Alright. So the next thing we need is to add a color, move, there we go, mix RGB, and we're going to plug our color value for our Musgrave texture into the factor value of the color. And what we want to do is we basically just want to change color 2 to a full white color. Right like that. Okay, so now we need another diffuse shader, or we can just Shift D, duplicate that one, pull it right back up here. We'll plug the color from our mix into our diffuse, and then we want the normal from our bump into the normal of that diffuse. And I'm going to pull that down here, maybe pull all of these down here just a little bit. There we go. Okay, so now we need a mix shader. Mix shader. And I'm going to go ahead and plop this one right in here because we're going to mix the diffuse and the glossy. And our factor is going to be 0.1. That means we're getting very little gloss from our glossy shader. However, we're going to connect the gloss to another node up here in a second. Okay, so now we need another mix shader. I'm just going to Shift D, pop it right up here. Mix shader from here into that mix shader here. This diffuse into that top shader. Right like that. And let's see. I don't remember if there was a factor for that one. Maybe it's just left 0.5. Let's go 0.5 on that one. Let's try that out. If it doesn't work out, then I'll double check. Okay, so now we need one last mix shader, and we're going to pull this one forward, and we're going to plug the mix shader into the top. We're going to come back down and grab our glossy shader at the bottom, and now we need to add in one more node that's in the input section, and it is called the layer weight. So the blend is going to be at 0.250. And we're going to grab from Fresnel and plug it right into the factor value. Now we can take the end of this mix shader and put it to our group output. So the last thing that we need to do, let me get some of this stuff cleaned up down here. Actually, I kind of like that one there. Okay. So the last thing that we need to do is basically create all of our inputs, which will be, first of all, color 1. We're not going to mess with this first one because this is our bump map texture. So we're going to go with our second one here. So we're going to go from the first dot here to color 1. Boom. And you'll see over here on the right side, it shows you both your inputs and your outputs for the entire group. First off, I have my color 1. And last, for my output, I have shader. So, now that I have color 1, now we need color 2. So go to the next node down. Plug that right into our color 2. And we're not going to plug in Mortar. If you already went and did that, don't plug it in. We're not ready for that yet. The next one we're going to do is we're going to plug in all the vectors. So, grab that next node down. Plug in vector from brick texture. Now go back up to where you have vector, that little purple dot. Let me zoom in a little bit. And you're going to pull from the same exact spot and connect it to another vector. You're not going on to the next circle over here. So let's pull from this one to our Musgrave texture. And then we'll pull from it again to our other brick texture. Right like that. Let's make sure we didn't miss any vectors. Alright, we should be good. Okay, so the next one is going to be our scale. We will go down to our next dot, and we will connect the scale down here. We will connect the scale of the Musgrave, and then we will connect the scale of the last brick texture. Okay, so then the last thing that we need to do is grab our last circle down here and plug it right into our strength of our bump map. Right there. Okay, so now you can see we've got a lot of lines going everywhere. It's kind of a big mess. It's a little confusing. That's why I tried to take you through it. Basically, what this group input is going to do is it's going to create an input. Now if I hit tab, I'm going to show you. It'll pop you out of the group editor and show you the node. So this is the node that we've just created. I'm going to rename this, and I'm going to call it tiles. So I've now named this tiles. You can see that I have an input for color 1, I have an input for color 2, I have a node spot for vector, I have an input for scale, and an input for strength. So all of these things inside of this texture, or of this node, this group, can be controlled from the outside. So now I have this one little node that does everything that I need it to do to create bathroom tiles or kitchen tiles or whatever. And all I got to do is adjust the colors, adjust the vector, mess with the scale, and mess with the strength. So all of this stuff is packaged into one little node. It's a very useful tool to be able to do this. It can be very confusing for first-timers to learn. I know I had trouble with it when I first started. I would urge you to get in here no matter how difficult it seems and just mess around with it. You can also, now this one I only have one output. If I wanted multiple outputs, like say I wanted to output my facing from my layer weight, I would plug that in as well and it would give me an output for that. I don't want that, so I'm going to leave it out. If you're ever not sure if you want something or don't want something, you can always come over here and you can click on it, see the minimum value, the maximum value, the default value that you have it set on. You can rename stuff, you can clear it out, whatever you want to do. This is your interface over here. You can open that by hitting the N key or close it, whichever you want to do. Okay, so this is basically how you set up a group, a node group in Cycles, node editor. I do believe that we have everything set up, I'm hoping, hopefully, so that this should work. So I'm going to go ahead and tab out, and now it's time to choose some colors. Let's go something weird. Let's go with red. I'm going to go like a bright red here, and then I'm going to go with like an off, maybe a darker red, reddish, orangish. Yeah, something like that. That'll work. Okay, so Now the scale and the strength, they might differ depending on what object you have. Hopefully if you're using the default cube, which if I go back to my default view, oh, I'm down here, hold on, 3D view, there we go. If you use the default cube, whatever settings I use should be the same for you. However, if not, you can always adjust it. It's not a big deal. Okay, so one thing we do need to do is we need to unwrap this. And I'm going to go ahead and tab into edit mode. I'm going to hit U to unwrap it. Oh, make sure everything is selected. If it's not, hit your A key. Then hit U to unwrap it. I like to Smart UV project mine. It gives me neat little... I'll show you. This is how it unwraps it when you do Smart UV. I like that a lot better than just layering all the squares on top of each other. But it's really up to you, however you want to do it. Okay, I'm going to tab out of edit mode for that. Bring my tiles in close. And one more node that I need to add here is my input texture coordinates. And I'm using the UV map. So I'm going to plug that right into my vector. Okay, so for the strength of this, I want 0.5. And that's, remember that the strength of this is for our bump map. So that's going to determine how thick these, the mortar and the tiles are going to actually appear. So if you want them thicker or if you want them a little closer to the wall, a little thinner, then you can always adjust this. However, the scale is going to be the size of our actual tiles. So for this one, I think 30 is going to turn out probably about right. And last thing I can do is plug this shader directly into the surface of our material output. And everything should be set to go. So let me go back to my default view. And now that we have it plugged in, you can kind of get a little bit of a view of what we're going to look like here. Okay, so let me go to my rendered view. Okay, let's see. It looks like somehow my gloss is off. Let's see what we can do to fix it. Oops, I went into edit mode. Let's go back to solid. And compositing. I'm going to click on my tiles again. If you want to mess with it, you can always hit tab. And it'll let you get right into the inner workings of it again. Okay, so I have my glossy plugged in here with 0.1. I have my glossy plugged in here. I've got the Fresnel 2.5 plugged in here. I've got the normal plugged in. The color's fine. Roughness 0.035. I feel like this mix value is off. Let me see here. Hold on just a second. Okay, sorry about that, guys. I was looking through and realized that what I had done from my last one, I forgot to use the color of this brick texture over here, which is really going to make a difference when we mix it with our diffuse shader and our glossy shader over here. So that's the one thing that we need to fix. We just grab that color and plug it right into the factor of the mix shader. That's the mix shader that we had previously set at 0.5. So we plug that right in there. Now we should be good to go. I'm going to hit tab, go back to my default, and let's go to my rendered view. Hey, there it is. Look at that. We have our bathroom, pool, tiles, whatever you want to call them. So if you look really closely at it, you'll see that there is nice light glinting off the top. The Musgrave texture that we have used is what is giving it a not uniform color. So if you see, there's like a light red here and a darker red here. Same for like this darker red, there's a little bit of a lighter streak. That's what the Musgrave texture is doing. Whereas the brick textures are giving us this mortar, it's giving us all of our little tiles. As well as with the bump that we created with the brick, you can see that it almost looks like the tiles are just popping right off of here. Especially when you start to move it around a little bit. Feel free to go ahead and mess around with this particular texture that we've created. See if you can make it a little bit better, or see if you can maybe incorporate it into a project a little bit. Let's see, actually let me go in here and see what I can do. Maybe let's see what it looks like if I increase this to like a 0.8. Increase the strength a little bit, see what I get. Oh, they're really popping out there now. Ooh, that looks really nice. I like that. So I hope you guys learned a little something about procedural textures. I will probably be bringing you more tutorials on procedural textures in the future as I start to develop more and more. And I hope you guys come back and watch the rest of them. Thank you for watching.